The chair doesn't detect a quorum, but I don't think we need one right now. We've got no votes to take. We're just going to have some presentations. To Mr. Wargo, if anybody has any new recipes, maybe to try for another mealtime, the sausage and biscuits were great. You did a good job. We appreciate that very much. Thank you. We go to tab 6, and we have some additions to your tab that have just been handed to you. Hope everyone has those. Jennifer Berry, Senior Research Associate, is going to introduce our panel and give us an overview of what's to come. Jennifer?
Good morning. Thank you. You all received a copy of the research plan for the 911 funding study and a copy of the survey that we sent out earlier this month to gather input from the directors of all 100 emergency communications districts across the state. The deadline for responding for that survey is next Tuesday, January 31st, and so far we have received, as of this morning, I believe, 54 responses out of 100 for that survey. So doing well so far on that, getting some great input. You also received a couple of handouts from our panelists this morning. We'll be presenting the draft report for this study at the May 2017 meeting and the final report at the Summer Commission meeting. At the December 2016 meeting, you heard from a panel consisting of state and local government officials who work in the emergency communications field. And today, a second panel continues the discussion from the perspective of the telecommunications industry. Our panelists today are, and I'll invite them up in just a minute, up to the table here, Tom Jankowski, Director of Public Policy for AT&T, Lavoy Knowles, Executive Director of the Tennessee Telecommunications Association, and Mandy Young, who's an attorney at Butler Snow, and she's representing Verizon today. We also invited the cable industry, but they were unable to provide a panelist today. I'll invite our three panelists up to the table up front here, and you can just go left to right or whatever order you want to. They're going to give their initial comments for a few minutes each, and then it'll be open up for discussion and questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. If you folks, do you have your microphones? Yes, you have. If you would start to my left, your right, and introduce yourselves, and then we'll go back to you, ma'am. That work? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Good morning. I'm Mandy Young, and I represent Verizon Wireless. I'm a lawyer and a contract lobbyist at Butler Snow.
Good morning. My name is Lavoy Knowles, and I represent the Tennessee Telecommunications Association.
Good morning. My name's Tom Jankowski. I'm with AT&T.
Thank you. So if you'll go ahead and start your presentation.
Good morning. As I said, I represent Verizon Wireless in Tennessee, and sadly, I'm a veteran in the 911 space. I was at the table working on the 911 legislation when the state applied the 911 fee to cellular phones a very long time ago with many of the people in this room. At that time, many of the same arguments that you've heard at the last couple of meetings were being made about the cost of the system and the need for wireless to support the 911 system. At the time the legislation passed, we all carried those big flip phones. You remember them, they were about this big. They had a really big battery on the back of them. And at that time, no one believed that so many Tennesseans would have one or two cell phones. And the numbers were far lower then than they are now. When I was asked to be on this panel, we did not know that CTIA would submit written comments. So those comments reflect much of what Verizon would have wanted me to say on its behalf. Therefore, I want to echo those comments, and I will be brief. Verizon appreciates the hard work of the men and women at the State Board and the PSAPs to have built a Tennessee 911 system that is really modeled and revered across the country. Verizon's proud that it has been a leader in working with those systems, the 911 Board and the PSAPs, to help pass fair legislation that does not negatively impact our customer base. But over time, Verizon believes that merely taxing phones to pay for 911 may be past its time. In addition, since Verizon does believe that the 911 fee is in fact a tax on our consumers, we remain committed that such tax should only be increased or decreased by this legislative body here at the state of Tennessee. Verizon and many carriers are worried that the 911 fees, as they have increased over the years, now may disproportionately impact wireless customers, as so many wireless phones exist, far beyond the number that was ever anticipated when this passed 15 or 20 years ago. In addition, as NG 911 is being implemented in this state and done so very effectively, it will save PSAPs money, as the 911 board will begin to pay the trunking cost for each of the PSAPs. That will help facilitate those dollars freeing up to be used for other purposes on the local PSAP level. Finally, Verizon believes the use of the 911 fees should be limited to the cost of relaying the emergency call to the primary 911 call center. Any cost incurred after the 911 call reaches the PSAP should be the responsibility of the PSAP and the local government. That discussion about how those calls are relayed, that discussion was occurring again when we passed the 911 bill. What are those costs and who should pay for those? And a lot of that has to do with dispatching. So all in all, we appreciate your time today. Because I've been at the table for a long time on this issue, after Lavoy and Tom speak, I'm happy to answer questions, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions before we go to the next panelist? All right, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Again, my name is Lavoy Knowles. I'm the Executive Director of the Tennessee Telecommunications Association. Our membership is made up of 21 of the small rural telephone companies and cooperatives scattered throughout Tennessee. Our members serve approximately 250,000 customers and pass over 352,000 homes and businesses. I will only be addressing the research questions that pertain specifically to our members. These include questions 5 through 9. Number 5 asks the question whether a flat rate communication service is the best manner in which to fund the 911 system cost, or whether such cost should be funded by a percentage surcharge or a different source, such as a water service, electric service, or state general funds or local taxes. First of all, the TTA members would encourage TACIR in the state of Tennessee to seek out other means of collection or funding to take place for the 911 service. The telephone bill has been used as a collecting source since the 1980s. And like Mandy, I've been in the industry for 36 years and remember when that was first put on the bill. And it was a very difficult thing to explain to the customer then, and it continues to be a difficult item to explain to customers. As everyone knows, the telecom bills are already complicated. Various state and local taxes, FCC charges, universal service charges, it just goes on and on and on with taxes, surcharges, and items on the bill, and we're required to break those down on the bill, which makes it more and more complicated. The 911 charge is just one more item that has to be explained to the consumer. So the TTA would encourage at least researching the possibility of using the water or electric bills or rolling it into the state budget as far as Manny said, is not having the tax shown on the telephone bill. But if TACIR and the legislature decide to continue to collect the surcharge from the local telecom bills, then we feel very strongly that the flat rate collection process is by far the best method. This way, all providers collect and remit the same amount, and there is no confusion as to different rates being collected in different jurisdictions or from different types of service such as cell phones versus landlines versus IP providers. We've just moved from a variable rate approach where the local communications boards had some influence on the rate charge versus the current flat rate. The flat rate is much easier to administer, collect, and explain because you got to remember if there's uncollectibles, then we have to keep track of those uncollectibles by a line item on each customer's bill and then remit those things back and try to get credit for those uncollectibles. So it's a very extenuating process. If you keep the same collection structure in place, then the TTA highly encourages that you could continue using this flat rate approach. By charging all users the same flat rate, there is no discrimination between types of service providers, such as cell phones, landlines, or IP providers. Number 6, whether the board membership of the State Emergency Communications Board should be amended to include other stakeholders, such as telecommunications providers, emergency communications districts that dispatch, and other interested parties. The TTA feels that all stakeholders should have a place on the state board and be represented. If you're expecting stakeholders to participate in the implementation, delivery of service, and collection of fees process, then they should also be a part of the policymaking process at the state level. In addition, each of the stakeholders bring a different perspective to the table, and their inclusion will help the board make better informed decisions. Many of the local communications boards already include telecom representatives, and it's a great method of keeping the communications between the agency and the provider at the highest level. This is true for the state board representation. There needs to be representation from each segment of the stakeholders, from my perspective. Number 7, whether there is a need or benefit for the board to have the ability to raise the 911 surcharge rate, should there be a financial reason to do so. As Mandy stated, we agree with her. Didn't know what she was going to say about that, but we feel it's a tax, and it also it's a local and or state government responsibility. In providing this service, only the state legislature should be able to raise rates. Under the old process, local 911 communications boards had the ability or authority to raise rates up to a minimum amount. Usually, I think on the landline side, it was like $3 for a business and $1.50 on residential. Most of the boards that I'm familiar with, and I've been involved with several because I was in an operating company for 30 years, and every county has one. So if you cross, all telecom companies cross county lines, so you're going to have multiple companies. So I was familiar with the company I was with. I had about 14 of them, or 15, even though it's a small company. So they were always all across the board on rates. Some would go up a nickel, some would go up a dime, some would go up a quarter, but ultimately they very quickly got to the maximum rate. I feel that only the legislature is responsible for rate setting. This will provide much more oversight and accountability in reviewing expenses that are being incurred. Number 8, whether there is a need or benefit for the providers of communication service to register with the board prior to providing service. Well, as you know, all the TTA members have been collecting the 911 surcharge for many years, and I see no need for them to register because they've already been doing the work. But in the case of new providers, and there's many of them, many IP providers are popping up, it would be a reasonable approach to require them to register with the state board prior to providing service. Many new telecom companies are being formed, as I said, such as IP hosted providers and others, and it's difficult to determine if they are collecting the correct amount or providing the appropriate service. I know at one point in time when IP first came out, it was a concern. You had to call in actually and register your phone where you were living at, so they could get you rated to the right PSAP. In addition, they need to do proper testing with a local communications district to ensure that 911 calls are being routed properly and they're being routed to the correct PSAP. The district also needs to ensure that the correct 911 circuits are in place and working properly. There is normally a testing phase between the provider and the communication district to make sure everything is working properly before turning up live circuits. Unless companies are required to register with the communications board, then this testing phase may not ever occur. The TTA encourages and recommends the registration of any new 911 providers. Lastly, number 9, whether there is a need or benefit for providers of communication service to notify the board when there is a known service interruption. All regulated telecom providers are already under the FCC required reporting requirement for outages. Once a telecom provider has an outage that hits a specified number of minutes, and I was trying to call and write my comments, I think it's 100,000 minutes, but I'm not 100% sure of that, then regularly reporting is required to the FCC. Now, the way this works, it ramps up really quick. If it is 100,000, assuming I'm correct, then if you got an outage in an area, say a storm hits and you got 1,000 customers out for 2 hours, that's 120 minutes times 1,000. You're up to 120,000 minutes just like that. So it really ramps up really quick. And so we're required to notify the FCC once it hits this threshold. And so I think it would be reasonable to require companies that may not want to hit 100,000, maybe 500,000 minutes, or maybe different method of calculating the outage. But companies should not be going for hours or days at a time without the communications district knowing there's an outage and when they plan to get it fixed. Also, most of the small companies that make up the TTA are very local and have an excellent relationship with the local 911 systems and boards, and already notify them if they know about an outage or if one occurs, although it may be a little more informally than we're talking about here. Setting up a reporting process would seem appropriate and would require all providers to play by the same rules. The district and possibly the state board should know when extended outages are occurring. If multiple or extended outages occur from a single provider, then it could indicate that problems exist either with their technology or with the availability of their network. The TTA members would be willing to assist and help you setting up any such rules if you decide to go this direction. That concludes my comments. The only other question I would want, or only a comment I'd like to add, is that the TTA feels that if any additional costs are needed to provide next generation 911 service, these costs should be borne by the state board or by the district. It should not be borne by the provider that you're requiring to saddle the new requirements upon. Sometimes additional circuits are needed to be added, and any additional cost to perform this function should be reimbursed by the communication district. Again, this concludes my comments, and I would like to thank TACIR and the committee and Ms. Battery for allowing me to address you today and for being asked to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Any questions before we proceed with the rest of the panel? All right, thank you. Go next to Mr. Jankowski.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Tom Jankowski. My role is Director of Public Policy for AT&T, and it's on behalf of AT&T, I want to thank you for the invitation to be here this morning and provide some comments. I guess one of the advantages of going last is that most of the other panelists have covered all your material, so I won't repeat what I had prepared if I was actually sitting in Mandy's seat, so I will just basically say a few things. Number one, congratulations on the passage of this legislation. I want to congratulate Chairman Norris and the members of the legislature. This was a great piece of legislation. I know it was a lot of work, but I think it has paid off. And where I sit from a global perspective, looking at 911 at a national level, Tennessee is now the model for funding of 911. And when I advise my state clients within AT&T, I advocate that they follow the Tennessee model, even using some of the language in the legislation, encouraging my advocacy people to adopt the principles that guided this legislation. So I commend the legislature and Chairman Norris and others who were involved in the legislation. It has really been a great piece of work. I'm also hopeful that in 2017, as I see 911 reform legislation already being introduced in a number of states, that Tennessee will not stand alone with this legislation. But what was really amazing to me when I worked with the industry and with my colleagues here to make this legislation happen, to me it was really amazing how the state and all the stakeholders worked together along with the industry. I think it's a model not only of a legislative achievement, but also of a private-public sector partnership. And I think that's one of the reasons why this committee has had this meeting a couple of weeks ago to hear the public safety folks and to have us here today. I think that partnership's really continuing. I think it's important just to highlight a couple of points. And the first point that I would highlight is that the 911 fee, historically, as has already been mentioned, was to provide for 911 service. And even though we strongly support public safety's funding, the 911 fee specifically was for providing the call service. And in fact, initially, AT&T, who was the legacy company providing service for the most part of the country, not everywhere, created a process to where three-digit numbers, 911, could be routed through its public switch network, whereas prior to that, it was only capable of switching 7-digit numbers. And because of that, there was a cost. And that cost was to actually defer that development of that technology. At least that's what I'm being told. And so, but that allowed the telephone subscriber or the telephone user at home to call public safety, and therefore that was 911, and that was a great technological achievement many, many years ago. But times have changed, and we see now where 911 is ubiquitous. its expectations are very high, where 911 is supposed to be available to anyone, anytime, everywhere, 24/7, 365 days a week. And we understand that demand and that expectation. Regarding funding, our position is that future 911 funding should migrate toward a general revenue type of imposition. We feel that is a not only an efficient way for 911 to be funded, it's also equitable among users, but also a reliable source for local government to have, whereas subscribers change, technology changes within our industry, but a broad-based type of funding would be reliable just as the state sales tax is for other consumer products. We also believe that NG 911 efficiencies will help reduce the cost of 911 delivery to cost to the local governments, and we feel that is going to help keep the fee where it is today, and a reliable funding should, what the statutory number that's already said should be adequate. We also support state administration, and I think this is where local government really gains a benefit by having the Department of Revenue administer the fee. That is their expertise, and that is where local governments don't have to worry about how to audit, administer, collect, and register. We just think the Department of Revenue has already registered or has registered retailers, and we think that is the most efficient and effective way to do that. And so in closing, again, I just want to, again, commend the legislature, this board, for its work, and again, just say that AT&T stands ready to help in any way possible. So if you have any questions, I'll entertain those.
Thank you, Ms. Jankowski. Any questions? Any questions of any panel member? Yes, sir. Representative Virgo.
Thank you. I know when the legislators passed this bill, which was an unbelievable bill, actually, and it was because I can see where it was an accounting nightmare in the past. But I asked at that time if we foreseen in the future, because we put that flat rate out there for $1.16 for every single person, whether because we had rates that were all over the place. If you were a business, you had one individual. You had other counties was, one county was separate, another county was separate, and we agreed. The legislative body agreed that this was the funding mechanism for the 911 for their software and their materials and locations to be able to take these 911s, because what we were doing at that time was we were putting something in place to allow and ensure that we had the capability of 911 all across the state. So, for example, in a district like mine, we were actually being charged more money, but we were willing to pay that extra fee because no matter where we traveled in the state, we was going to have that capability of having the 911 access. But I asked at that time in those hearings about, do we see the growth of these cell phones, and will that not be a net revenue increase? So what I'd like to, for TACIR to look at some point in time as we move forward with this is how many phones where cell phones were being used in the state of Tennessee 2 years ago compared to now, because that has to be, I believe that number has grown. Because I remember asking the question then, as this grows, because with our population increasing here in Tennessee and everything, we're going to be able to receive more and more and more revenue that goes into these things. And then there's going to be that temptation of, wow, we've got some extra money here. Let's go ahead and take this money and start spending it on needs outside of the 911, and that's not what the intention was. This was for, and I don't think that we want to go backwards. And I think we put this flat rate in place to make sense and lessen the accounting nightmare for you all to move forward. So I think that's going to be important. And I don't know how you could project how many cell phones or whatever are going to be out there in 2020 or 2025 or whatever, but that'd be some interesting numbers to be able to look at.
And Representative Wargo, again, Mandy Young, Mr. Chairman, I think when we passed it 15 or 16 years ago, originally, to just apply the first 911 fee to cellular phones, no one could ever anticipate the numbers that are being used today, because some of you carry two, a work phone and a personal phone. I would say that some of that growth has flattened. We can get you the numbers. I think yes, there may be some new growth, but it won't be quite what it was over the last 15 years. And I think that's in some ways how the numbers were generated, to make sure it covered the 2012 numbers, but also have some growth. And the state board has the authority to give that money back in grants and to spread that off, that back out to all the 911 districts if additional monies came in. And they did that for the last fiscal year because there were additional monies. So I don't know yet, though, because as you know, the industry used to fight that there were still a pretty good number of landlines, but there are people now that don't have a landline. So some of that counterbalances each other, and it's really hard to keep up with that number.
Mr. Chairman, Mandy, you brought something to my attention when you said a moment ago about giving out some of the extra money in grants. By any chance, is some of that part of the $5 million that was in the governor's plan for broadband included in some of that money or not?
I have not seen the total governor's plan, Representative Workout, but I do not believe that money. It is grants back to the PSAPs. It would not be broadband, I believe. He
Okay.
Take it out of that 911 fund. The FCC might have an opinion about that. It's supposed to be dedicated to 911 operations.
Yep. We heard hearings on that yesterday and about spending $5 million, so I was wondering where some of that $5 million was coming from. Thank you.
Good questions and good comments, Representative Wergo. Thank you. Anything else for the panel? If not, lady, gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate your indulgence and being with us today. Dr. Lippard is going to update us on the Southeast Tennessee Regional Water Supply Study. Ms. Rourke Patrick could not be here today, so Dr. Lippard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the update is located at tab 7 of your docket book. And April and Teresa are passing out some additional information. The material, like the Chairman said, was prepared by Lanice Rourke Patrick, our former executive director, who's now on board as a senior public policy consultant. We've had one of the first things we've had Lanice working on is the Southeast Tennessee Regional Water Supply Study update. And this is largely because of her expertise from where she served on TDEC's Water Resources Technical Advisory Committee in the past, and her work with the Consolidated Utility District in Rutherford County. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to do it the justice that Lanice would have done. She has a lot of supporting material which has been provided to you. So I'm going to go through and just touch on the highlights of the material. But I would like to do, if it pleases the commission, is invite Lanice again at our May meeting to go into some more detail on some, and I'm sure there'll be a number of updates between now and then as well. But so just going through, near the end of last year, the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation asked customers of 10 Southeast Tennessee water utilities to temporarily limit water use for non-essential purposes, and this was because of an extreme drought condition they were facing. Many of the utilities were finding it difficult to meet customer demands despite their sharing of resources across utilities. The U.S. Drought Monitor had classified several counties in the area as experiencing severe, extreme, or even exceptional drought conditions. And the National Weather Service had indicated that precipitation in these areas was as much as 16 inches below normal. No significant precipitation was predicted at the time or for the remainder of that year, and both surface and groundwater levels in the region were declining. So there you have, as in your attachments, you have an article from the Chattanooga Times Free Press as attachment A, which goes into more detail in describing the conditions, the drought conditions at the time in that area. Two utilities had to take extreme measures to ensure continued service. The city of Pikeville, which relies on wells and serves the Bledsoe Correctional Facility, laid a line over land to the Sequatchie River. The Fall Creek Falls Utility District, which ordinarily gets its water from a treatment plant at the now closed state-owned Taft Youth Development Center, resorted to a rather elaborate temporary treatment facility that drew water from the lake at Fall Creek Falls State Park, and it tied it into the distribution system via an existing fire hydrant. And then attachment B in your packet provides a news article describing the past challenges faced by both of these utility districts. So this is the second time since the historically worst drought of 2007, 2008 that parts of Tennessee have experienced severe drought. The 2012 drought was broken by a large amount of rain, an unusually wet July. And the same was true in 2016 in Middle Tennessee. Unfortunately, the same was not true on the Cumberland Plateau, and most especially in the Sequatchie Valley region. In response to the extreme conditions in the region and its continuing water supply challenges, Governor Haslam asked TDEC to help find a long-term solution. To begin the process, Deputy Commissioner Brock Hill invited 7 counties and the development districts that serve them to a meeting on December 1st of last year, where they heard from staff from the National Weather Service and made their case for relief. Staff of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers led the meeting and explained study options that are available to the group. I would say that the Corps and TDEC both offer study options to assist utilities in finding low-cost solutions to water challenges, but one of the requirements that TDEC has to participate in these studies is that the utilities form a regional group so that the study can serve the entire, a regional team so the study can serve the entire region and not just one utility. As I already mentioned, Lanice represented TACIR on at that meeting, and the minutes from the meeting are attached in your docket books at attachment C. TDEC and the Corps hosted a second meeting to further discuss the Cumberland Plateau's issues in January this year, January 13th. In addition to the host agencies, attendees included representatives from local utilities, local governments, MTAS, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Development Program, TVA, Southeast Tennessee Development District, and the Tennessee Association of Utility Districts. And basically they agreed that Southeast Tennessee Development District will hold a meeting of interested utilities to identify those that will move forward together as a defined study region. So in other words, to meet the TDEC's requirement for a regional team for a study. The next step for the working group could be to pursue gathering preliminary information to determine which of these the study processes to pursue. Now, of course, the concerns about water supply are not limited to any one particular part of Tennessee, and because of that, Lanice has also prepared a one-page fact sheet which was handed out to you this morning, which will be attachment D on the web page material. And this goes through and explains challenges and responses to those challenges faced across the state, including on the plateau, in Middle Tennessee, and the Memphis area. Also, your packet includes a number of supporting materials supporting the information in the fact sheet, including news articles and copies of the Corps' proposed plan for the Percy Priest Reservoir. I'm going to go through some of these highlights on the fact sheet. I will also let you know that when you go to the electronic version of this on our docket book webpage, there are a number of links in this document to some larger documents and web pages just to provide additional resources that would not have fit in the packet. So first of all, with the Cumberland Plateau, utilities in the region continue to struggle with drought. And as I already mentioned, TDEC and the Corps offer aid in the form of studies to identify long-term, cost-effective, low-impact solutions, but they do require that the utilities form regional teams to cooperate in the study. As I already mentioned, Southeast Tennessee Development District is taking the responsibility for forming a team. Lanisa has pointed out an important thing to know is that utilities in the Sequatchie Valley subregion of the Cumberland Plateau may have conflicting interests, with downstream users concerned that an upstream dam would adversely affect their current water supply, making the need for a regional study and regional cooperation even more critical. And although the city of Pikeville and the Fall Creek Falls Utility District have been the focus of concern lately, counties of the Northern Plateau, including Morgan and Scott, experience similar problems and warrant continued attention. We're fortunate in that TDEC's efforts to create a framework for regional water resource studies, and again, that's where there's a link to the components of that framework, which was this framework is an outgrowth of the 2007-2008 drought. And having this framework has resulted in a support system just for such efforts. So it's as bad as the drought was, it did put us in the response to it put us in a position to respond to the current droughts and future droughts better. In Middle Tennessee, utilities depended on tributary reservoirs remain engaged in drawn-out efforts to gain sufficient water supply allocations, and this is largely to meet the growing demand with the population growth in the Nashville metropolitan area. Rutherford County depends on J. Percy Priest Lake, but was advised in 2009 their storage allocations would not yield the water expected under their 2003 contracts. Growth has escalated even more since then, but efforts to resolve the issue have been stymied by the Corps' delays in completing its own study. An important point, JPP is by far the smallest Tennessee lake subject to these agreements, yet it is already subject to the largest water supply reallocation. It's the fourth largest percentage-wise in the entire U.S. The Corps has proposed a rule to clarify and standardize its approach to water supply storage and accounting, and again, there's a link to that rule in the document. The comment period for this closes on February 14th. An extension has been requested. And interest and concerns about the rule vary across the country with geography and water law, meaning that states may be unable to agree on what they want in the final rule. So what's best for some western states may not be what's best for Tennessee. And most eastern states like Tennessee do not now play a role in water allocation. Finally, in the Memphis area, TVA's drilling of wells to access water to cool its new Allen combined cycle plant, which we heard about a little bit yesterday, raises concerns about potential for pollution of the Memphis sand aquifer. TDEC granted permits, but the controversy has continued, with legislators from the area proposing a regional entity to oversee the aquifer. An important point is the state of Mississippi continues to pursue its claim that Memphis is stealing its water, and its federal case remains in the hands of the U.S. Supreme Court. So I guess it's not just Georgia who wants the case is currently in the hands of the special master, who has ordered a hearing on the narrow issue of whether the aquifer is an interstate resource. The case is the court's first to raise the issue of rights to groundwater reserves that lie beneath multiple states. How the issue is resolved could have ramifications across the entire country. And then Lanice has also provided some possible takeaways at the bottom of that one page, and those are the still largely informal regional water resource planning structure developed by TDEC may need some shoring up as the need for such studies grows. Regional cooperation supported by federal, state, and local water supply entities may require a formal statutory structure. Water supply policy officials in Tennessee should follow development of the Corps' proposed rule closely to ensure that the final version supports rather than disrupts the state's water supply planning efforts. Likewise, they should follow closely the Mississippi versus Tennessee case in the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Commission may want to hear about these issues from TDEC, the Corps, and the Tennessee Attorney General. So, as I said, I'm happy to try to address any questions, but what I'd like to do is invite Ms. Rourke-Patrick to speak on this issue in May, and possibly, if it pleases the Commission, also attempt to invite some of the TDEC, the Corps, and the Tennessee Attorney General to speak on the issue as well.
Any objections to Dr. Lippard's plan? Looks like it's a go. Cliff, thank you very much. And I guess when Lanice comes, we might have some questions from her. Okay, go to tab 8 now, and we are waiting for Lieutenant Governor McNally. I don't know if he'll make it or not, but we do have an honor for him. Development District's overview of infrastructure inventory, survey process with an information update. Dave TACIR. Dave.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Thank you for having me today. At the December Commission meeting, Mayor Greer asked if we could hear the thoughts on the Development District's thoughts on the infrastructure project. So today I'd like to introduce Susan Reed, Executive Director from the 1st Tennessee Development District, and Michael Skipper, Executive Director from the Greater Nashville Regional Council, to talk about how locals use the infrastructure project and how we could improve it. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Susan Reed, Executive Director, 1st Tennessee, and Michael Skipper. Ma'am, we'll let you go first. Still not on.
Okay, I'll start up.
Much better. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. I'd like to express my appreciation for you allowing us to come and speak with you this morning, and also express our appreciation for being able to do the infrastructure survey. Back when we first started doing this just about 20 years ago. We were collecting the data, and of course, we're just a little bit concerned about the accuracy of that data. I am very pleased to say now we feel much better about the information that's provided in the infrastructure survey, that those numbers have been refined and we feel that they are very accurate. So I just wanted to start with that and tell you how good we do feel about the information that we do gather. Some of the things that we use the information for is to assist state agencies with looking at identifying infrastructure needs. And I'll, a little bit later, would like to read you a letter that Mayor Eldridge from Washington County has written about how he used it to help with their credit rating. It's used to develop grant applications. It gives us standing when we apply for grants for our communities. It shows the grantor agencies that we've gone through a process, that the communities have gone through a process, and that they're well thought out plans. It serves as the capital improvement plan for some of our communities, and those that have more defined capital improvement plans, it serves as the basis of that for them, and in general just serves as a good planning document for the state. I understand that the new administration is talking about money for infrastructure. This survey that's conducted each year and prepared puts Tennessee well ahead of the other states. I've heard, and I'm not positive this is so, but I have heard that Tennessee is the only state that prepares such a document as this. So we are very well prepared. It puts us in a good situation when monies do become available. Another thing that we have used this information for is as a result of requests from our federal legislators. From our own Congressman Rowe in 1st Tennessee District, he asked which of our communities and where there were needs for potable water. He wanted to search for funding for that. So that was a very good tool. We were able to tell him what areas needed water, we're still lacking in water, and what the real cost for preparing for providing that would be. So. Those are some of the uses that we have, and now, if I might, Mayor Eldridge would have liked to have been here this morning, but he had already an out-of-state trip planned. So he wrote a letter, and I believe you all might have it, but if you'll bear with me.
Everyone does have a copy, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. It's Dear Senator Norris, a couple of years ago, I was in New York meeting with analysts from the credit rating agencies that monitor and report on Washington County. During the discussion, I was pointedly asked what is Washington County's plan to fund its significant long-term school and highway infrastructure needs. I was there to discuss an advance refunding of $130 million in county debt, but it was obvious the rating analysts had reviewed the TACIR infrastructure survey and were concerned about the enormous investment in facilities and infrastructure Washington County was facing over the next several years and its impact on our tax rate and total indebtedness. This question and the concern expressed by the analysts prompted me to begin to develop a capital improvement plan for Washington County. Washington County has nearly $300 million invested in facilities and infrastructure, and as such has millions of dollars investment needs each year for capital maintenance, improvement, and replacement of its existing assets and acquisition or development of new assets. In the next 10 years, well over $100 million is required to meet needs already identified and prioritized. In varying degrees, this is the situation in virtually every county and city across the state. The TACIR infrastructure report was a valuable tool in helping Washington County identify future capital funding requirements and incorporate them into a disciplined, business-like approach to capital needs prioritization and funding. The resulting 10-year capital investment plan was adopted by the County Commission in June 2016, along with approval of more than $9 million in new annually recurring funding from the property tax rate. The annual infrastructure report ended up being the impetus for development of a capital investment plan that will benefit the taxpayers of Washington County for generations to come. But I have also used the report as justification for grant applications, as well as documentation for our congressmen and senators in Washington regarding the infrastructure needs of the 8 counties in Northeast Tennessee and how federal funding would help close the gap on providing critical assistance to communities that don't have the means to help themselves. Another benefit of the report is benchmarking. I have found the report to be an excellent tool for comparing our needs and our progress with that of peer counties. I assume state agencies also benefit from the comparative analysis of the data and the trends in obsolescence, capacity, cost, etc. the report portrays. Because the report is compiled annually, it is a valuable current data available at no cost to every community. I'm not aware of any other source from which to obtain the comprehensive information contained in the annual infrastructure report. Therefore, I strongly urge TACIR to continue providing this report to the legislature and communities across the state. It is an effective tool that helps us predict and prepare for the future of Tennessee. Sincerely, Daniel J. Eldridge, Mayor. My only final thought would be that the infrastructure report is a very good return on investment for what it costs the state each year. We really do have good information in that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Any questions of Mrs. Reed before we proceed? Okay, Mr. Skipper. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm representing the Greater Nashville Regional Council, which is the development district that serves 52 cities and 13 counties across Middle Tennessee, from Trousdale to our east over to the Tennessee River, from Williamson County to our south up to the Kentucky state line. And my seat is falling.
Need more infrastructure in that chair.
Yeah. We'll make sure that's in the report next year. But I'm happy to be here. It's hard to say it any better than the mayor did via the letter, but we're here to offer our strong support for the public infrastructure needs inventory. I'll say that we really consider it the basic building block for the capital planning that we help our local communities do, which serve a range of purposes, from understanding the geographic distribution of the needs within those communities to understanding their fiscal impact and their costs, to helping them prepare grant applications for state and federal funds to cost share in the investment of the infrastructure, to making sure we're investing strategically. So if we're doing a roadway investment that also is in a corridor that requires other utility upgrades, that we know that information ahead of time, it could save costs down the road from being strategic about those investments. And then in educating the community about the cost of basic infrastructure to support our needs today, as well as prepare for future economic and community development. And so, again, we offer our strong support for the penny, as we call it, for the basic reasons of helping our local communities do local capital planning, which has really improved over the years. But you may or may not be surprised to know a lot of this stuff is really done with really unsophisticated spreadsheets across the state of Tennessee. And without the penny, I think it would be a long road to improve that process. I would say, though, we acknowledge some of the concerns with the report and the methodology, and been working with your staff over the last year. We'll continue to work with your staff on a few improvements as we move forward. We'd like to see a more continuous data collection effort, which I think would help with the freshness of the data that's reported on an annual basis. We're working with your staff to look to better disaggregate the information beyond below the county level, so that it's more meaningful for local communities and the citizens across each of those counties. We would like to improve the definition of a need. Right now, it's a pretty wide definition. There's obviously a big distinction between a project that somebody thought about 5 years ago, but and put it on a list, from something that is sort of imminent, that needs to be constructed in order to support either job creation or a current present day need. And we also want to make sure that the right data are being collected through the surveys to make sure that it's actually useful by other state agencies and local governments beyond just the purpose of preparing a report for the legislature each year. Those being some of the things that we would like to see improved. The staff is aware of that, is in agreement with a lot of this stuff. We look forward to working with you all to make the infrastructure inventory even more powerful in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Skipper. Any questions of Mr. Skipper? Mayor Greer is the one who brought all of this to our attention. Thank you, sir, for that. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. I do appreciate the Development District coming forward because this information needs to get back to not only TACIR but the General Assembly. And, of course, a lot of the work in the infrastructure falls back on the elected officials and the department heads that y'all are dealing with. And of course, when we talk about our conceptual needs, sometimes our conceptual needs are not part of our capital plan. And if we can in the future identify things that we're thinking far out about that might not be in our own capital plans, maybe identify those a little bit differently. Thank you.
All right. If there are no, yes, sir. Go ahead, Mayor.
One question or comment. In the process of these studies you do, with the impending debate that's coming up on fuel and tax increases and things of that nature, I think it's very important for the infrastructure study on the roads and transportation needs to be looked at by the members, just to really see what the need is across the state of Tennessee, because that is massive as well. Thank you.
Absolutely.
If you'd like to make a comment, I'd appreciate it.
I think one of the benefits of this inventory is that it looks beyond the projects that are presented to you all each year by the Tennessee Department of Transportation. Transportation extends well beyond the scope that TDOT is pursuing to the local level, and a good bit of the transportation infrastructure costs are borne by local communities and never hit the books of TDOT. And I think that's one of the valuable benefits of this infrastructure. It's a complete picture of transportation needs across the state of Tennessee.
Dr. Lippard, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael, as far as the definition of needs go, have you had a chance to give any thought to how to improve that definition?
Cliff, I think there's a couple of ways to go about it. I think we can offer some recommendations for how to define the need, but I think right now, going back to the comment earlier, I think we have to make a clear separation between conceptual needs, program needs, and needs that are under development, and report those needs in those sort of compartments so that we can understand the needs that are right in front of us versus those needs down the line. The other thing that is important about defining needs accurately is when it comes to cost estimation. It's much more difficult to provide cost estimates for conceptual projects that haven't even begun the planning phase of their development.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I guess you'll have Governor McNally here at the next meeting to receive his written document. Thank you both. Thank you so much for coming and participating. There's no other business. We go to the next meeting, which is set right now May 23rd and 24th. Does anybody have any problems or objections to that? Yes, sir, Mr. McMahon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, the May 23rd and 24th is fine. I thought I thought that was already set. Was that?
Yes, it is. Yeah, unless you need to change it.
No, sir. But in August, for our choice in August, we do have a preference. And Assistant Commissioner Paula Davis and I both have important training that it's mandatory to be at on the 22nd.
What day is your training?
22nd and 23rd. So if we could do the 29th and 30th, if that's not a problem with any of the other commission meetings.
Any objections? 29 and 30? And Miss Paula, you missed homemade biscuits and sausage from Representative Wergo, and he'll be willing to take orders now for the May meeting. Does that look good for everybody? 29, 30, yes, sir. Is that good for you?
Is that okay, Senator? Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask if staff could give us some thinking about what we're going to do on 911 at our next meeting. Is that a report or what is that?
The intent is to have a draft report for your review and comment at the May meeting.
Okay. I don't know if anybody else is, but we're looking at the funding. We're developing. I know everybody's looking at budgets now, but we're working on our budgets, and we're having a challenge with our local stakeholders as to the percentage at which they fund the 911 budget. And we're not going to have anything from us at that particular time, and I'm not asking because they know. So that would be something we could take up with the next time. Has MTAS been included in this? Has Ms. Baer included any responses from MTAS? Because I know our local city administrator has asked MTAS to weigh in and give us, and CTAS to give us some information on that. And it was real interesting. One of the response was from the staff member that they talked to initially, why are you funding it at all? And I've got to follow that one up because I don't understand. You know, that's our local responsibility. But I didn't know if anybody else wanted to weigh in on any of that.
Anyone else? Jennifer, do you have an answer?
My quick answer is we will talk to MTAS and CTAS. Yes, we will include them.
Good.
Yes.
Because let me just ask everybody here locally, you support in your budget, you support 911.
Right, we do.
Okay. Well, that wasn't listed as one of the stakeholders, and I guess anybody could have put it down as under other there. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Lippert?
And I just wanted to clarify the reason that we're having it's unusual for us to have a draft report, a legislative draft report at the May meeting, but it's because of the due date on this report was set in statute for September of 2017. So that's why we're doing the draft at the May meeting so that we can have the final report at the August meeting and have it approved in order to meet the legislative requirement.
All right, looks like we're completed in about an hour because we started a minute late. That's very good, very, very efficient on everybody's part. So, with nothing else, we're adjourned.